Hello, my name's Bonnie Meekums, and I'm going to read a short section from my joint memoir with my sister Jackie Hales. The memoir is called Remnants of War. It's a book-length memoir and it's available for pre-order right now. This is the 20th of March 2021. You can order it through Amazon and the paperback version will also be available next month. So the section I'm going to read is called Up the Apples and Pears. As we got older, we would stay up late in the summer, making the most of the light, and we would be allowed to run up the road to meet Dad as he pedalled his way down it on his bike, with its basket on the front. His ready smile would greet us, and we sensed his pleasure at being home with his family. We would then have the thrill of taking it in turns, or squabble about whose turn it was, to ride on the crossbar. No helmet, no seat, just Dad's brilliant balance to safely get us home. It never occurred to us that anything would go amiss. We were with Dad, and if we were with Dad, his strong hands and arms would always keep us safe. When we were small, however, we would be ready for bed when Dad came home, quickly packed off up the apples and pears to settle into our beds while he gratefully devoured his dinner. We shared a room until about a year after our older sister left to get married. Ugh. Going to bed in the winter was a cold affair. There was no central heating, and the icy blast would creep round the windows and into the rooms. We would frequently wake to ice on the inside of the window. We went to bed with our rubber hot water bottles in between the sheets, prioritizing warming the bit where our feet would be. We piled on the blankets, most of them cream or black with red or blue blanket stitching around the edges, all topped off with our eiderdowns and candlewick bedspreads. We had matching eiderdowns, full of feathers, so they must have been bought specially for us, unlike the other bedclothes. Jackie's was blue and Bonnie's, despite not being a girly girl, was pink. They stayed in the family for many years after Bonnie left home and were even used by her two oldest children. Such was their enduring quality. The labels on the blankets told their own tale of how they'd been issued to civilians, some even to the troops, utility grade, but all warm wool. Sometimes the pile on top of us would be so heavy, as we added another to the 4 or 5 we already had, we would struggle to turn over. Mum would declare us to be as snug as a bug in a rug, though we hoped the bugs were not keeping us company. The bundle could be pulled right up over our ears, just in case a monster came in during the night and cut one of our ears off. Our white cotton sheets were top and tailed each week, the top one moving to the bottom and a clean one on top, so that only the bottom one needed to be washed each time. Our pillows were either full of feathers that escaped now and then and made us sneeze, or something called flock, which was thick and lumpy. If we were lucky, we had one of each. The bed frames were bolted together, attached to the bed ends, and containing a rectangular frame of springs on which the mattress sat. Jackie had light oak bed ends, Bonnie dark. Neither of them knew. When we were very small, it was part of the bedtime routine to check under the bed, peering into the dark cavern under the springs where only the pot had a right to be, just in case there was a lurking dragon or a monster waiting to spring as soon as a little girl thought she was safe. Despite his long working day, we would not settle until Dad came to tuck us in. To be tucked in meant to be snug under our piles of bedclothes, being tucked in tightly. It was impossible to fall out of bed. Then would come one of our favourite times. Dad never had to be encouraged to spend what little time he had with us, because he loved being a dad. Usually he would stretch himself out on one of the beds, hands under his head and a twinkle in his eye. Then he would tell us a story. He didn't have one to read to us, but he had his imagination and his life. Once there was a little bird and he flew away. The end. If he was very tired or he'd come in late, Dad might well say something like this. His other favourite was, once upon a time there was a little boy and he grew up. The end. No, tell us a real story. We sisters, sitting up in our beds, squealed in unison, clutching the edges of the tightly tucked-in bedclothes and stroking the soft sheen of our eiderdowns as our legs kicked in protest. We hoped if we made enough fuss, he would relent. Sometimes, to protests from both of us, he would extricate himself and go downstairs, a grin on his face. On other occasions, when he could squeeze out a bit more energy, he would tell us a real story. Dad's stories always had twists and turns and mysteries that somehow got wrapped up at the end, leaving us ready and willing to say our prayers and settle down to dream. One of the stories he told us was about his time in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War, a time when he was able to see a different kind of life for himself, albeit temporary. He was a batman, a personal servant to an officer, a job he'd been assigned after his mastoiditis had prevented him from being a pilot. One cloudy day, he and his friend George were out walking when a German plane came out of nowhere and fired on them. Dad threw his friend in a ditch and himself on top of him. From that day forth, they became best buddies. Our dad, the hero. He loved to tell us stories about his own childhood, and we loved listening to them, especially the ones in which he was naughty or got into scrapes. He would bring to life the game Knock Down Ginger, which consisted of tying together the door knockers all along the street, then standing on the end of the extremely long piece of string and pulling, and waiting to see the ladies come out of their houses before running like thunder. Other stories concerned family history and became filed away in our memories until technology allowed us to uncover the truth of his words. We were enthralled by tales of soldiers and princesses, of someone who lost his house on the turn of a card, Dad's own mother being reduced in circumstances. These stories were to prove engrossing in many years' time, as we uncovered truths behind family myths. Sadly, the resources for finding family history came too late to be able to tell him how much was right, and more he didn't know. But in his memory, the stories survived for the next generation, just as they had been passed down to him. Once we were old enough to read to ourselves at bedtime, we would clutch our latest library book and get that light out, meant diving under the covers with a torch until we were tired enough to give in and sleep. In fact, Dad seemed to have a sixth sense even about the torches under the bed, and would usually call out the remonstration just for good luck as he climbed the stairs to bed. But while his words were stern, his voice contained a hint of pride. Once we had transistor radios, our sneaky selves would tune the tiny dial into Radio Luxembourg, pull in our earphones, if we had any, and add the music to our secret world, ready and willing to embrace pirate radio stations when they sprung up in the early 1960s. When we had the luxury of our own bedrooms, we didn't even have to consider each other. We don't know whether Mum ever knew full well what we were up to, but as mums ourselves, we know it's a safe bet that she played the game, knowing there was no point in trying to stop us. We didn't venture back downstairs until the morning, as a pot and then later a bucket under the bed meant we didn't need to brave the dark and cold to get to the outside toilet at night. It is perhaps because Dad wasn't so good at formal English that his capacity for stories wasn't stifled, or perhaps he was disinterested in English because he refused to stifle his love of a good story. In the early part of the 20th century, English was taught by reading the great poets and novelists of the day and of old, often memorizing large chunks of text. There was little emphasis on a child's own creativity, The magic he brought to his stories was despite, not because of, his education. Whilst Dad would not have equated his capacity for capturing and telling fantastical stories with any aptitude in English, in hindsight, they probably influenced our own writing. Like him, we might begin a tale not knowing where it might end. We follow a thread to see where it might lead, like a hunter on the trail of a story's scent, getting excited by what we might find, just like those two small girls got excited as they listened and tried to stay warm. We loved then and love now, not knowing where the story might end, what secrets are hidden in this magical process that is storytelling. Dad died in 1998, at the age of 88. We can still hear his gentle voice, telling us stories as we type. A working class man who left school at 14, a butcher, an artist, a mathematician, a fixer of broken things, and a hunter of stories.